So welcome to you all, EBU colleagues in the Zoom room, and we are extremely happy to live stream this session on our website for the general public. This event is part of the Music and Radio 60-minute session series organized by EBU Music. Before we start, we'd like to express our sincere thank you to Nicolas Pont, General Manager of the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra, as well as Martina Wiesbeck and their colleagues for their amazing support in organizing this event. And of course, a warm thank you to Sir Simon Rattle for having accepted to take part in this interview. Now, let me introduce Edward Blakeman, our interviewer for today. Edward has just retired from BBC Radio 3, where he worked for 34 years and was also closely involved with the BBC Proms. He was most recently head of music programs at Radio 3 and a member of the classical music group at the European Broadcasting Union. He is continuing to work with various musical charities and has been commissioned to write a book on the early music pioneer David Munro. He is also editing the Cambridge Companion to the Flute. So as he says, he is happily very busy. Attendees inside this Zoom room are welcome to ask questions, so you can simply write them down in the chat. Thanks very much for being with us today, and I'll now give the floor to you, Edward.
Thank you very much, Monica. It's a great pleasure to be here. Hello and welcome to all the members of the EBU and beyond who've joined us this afternoon. And a special welcome and our grateful thanks to Sir Simon Rattle, who joins us from his home in Berlin. And Simon, I gather it's snowing in Berlin.
Well, this is really a Christmas card out there. That's a nice change and quite unusual here.
Well, it makes a rather lovely background for us looking at.
Very good. Yeah, no, it's the real thing. I can promise.
It's the real thing. Okay. So let's just set the scene before we start talking with a brief description of your recent career, which I expect that we all know, but just to run through your period as artistic director and chief conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic, which was started in 2002 and ran to 2018. Then we welcomed you back to London for a period with the London Symphony Orchestra as music director, and that lasted until this year, 2023. And you've recently become chief conductor of the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra, and you started in September. And I'm sure everyone on this call today has got such vivid memories of wonderful concerts over the years with these orchestras and with many others that you've conducted. And we know that you are also passionate spokesman for classical music, and there'll be lots more of that later. Let's begin, though, with the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra and Choir. Bit of background: they were founded after the Second World War in 1949 by and with the chief conductor Eugen Joachim, succeeded by Raphael Kubelik, Sir Colin Davis, Lorin Maazel, and Maris Janssens. That's quite a starry lineup, and actually only 5 chief conductors. So your appointment is number 6, Simon, starting in September, and you started with Haydn's Creation. That's quite a good way to start, really, isn't it, with Creation? How were those performances? What reactions did you have back in September?
Well, it really did feel like a new home. Although I've known the orchestra since 2010, and we've been working together regularly, it's a different thing if you're actually part of the family. And because I'd been very close to Maris Janssens for so many years, and it was Maris who was instrumental in persuading me that, yes, I had to go. And I was really terrified, given the pressures of a musical life, that I might fall in love with another orchestra. And God help us, the minute I'd finished the first day of Schumann's Paradiso Peri, I realized what an extraordinary group of people, and that they were very much not only Maris's orchestra, but Raphael Kubelik's orchestra. So there was a feeling of Menschlichkeit and family and friendly, passionate cooperation. When I was 15, I went to hear this orchestra play in Liverpool with Kubelik playing the Beethoven Ninth. And it is one of those occasions that changed my life, because it was not only a great performance, but as a young conductor, I saw for the first time what can happen when an orchestra and a conductor are totally in sync with each other and have such a powerful bond. And it gave me just another impression of the standards that were possible. Little could I think that about 1,000,000 years later, I would be standing in front of them, let alone being the boss. So in a way, it's a kind of, it's a strange kind of homecoming for me.
Yeah. Had you been to a lot of orchestral concerts before you heard the BRSO?
Oh, absolutely.
15?
Absolutely.
So
I went to everything I could see, not wherever I was. It was mostly in Great Britain, but there was a lot going on. I had a lot of recordings. I already knew the orchestra through recordings, but it should be the live occasions that stay with us. And I can remember what it felt like. I can remember what the orchestra looked like. I can remember where I sat in the hall to this day. One very, very red tenor in the chorus, about to burst his brain singing the finale.
Those sort of experiences, they're absolutely indelible on the memory, aren't they? But I have to ask you, before we move on from Liverpool, which of course was where you were born and where you grew up, back there or a little bit earlier, were you a Beatles fan?
Do you know, I learnt about it later. Of course, I heard it. I was so much involved in my own little world of classical music, of theatre, of poetry in pubs, of all kinds of things in pubs. Somehow everybody was listening to the Beatles, and I would have had a chance to go to the Cavern, and I didn't. Which, how stupid and arrogant can you be, particularly as a teenager? And of course, later, late teens, early 20s, I just realized what astonishing musicians they were.
And you've said, I think, haven't you, since then, that you think pop has got an awful lot of value and has had through the decades.
Well, I think music is all music. When it's done well, when it's done with that kind of intensity and that kind of intelligence. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's go back to the BRSO, because you've got quite a history of conducting this orchestra, haven't you? This appointment hasn't come out of the blue. So can you take us through a little bit of that history of working with the orchestra?
For me, the actual history was the conductor was my friend. It would never have occurred to me that Maris was as sick as he was. And it seems physically to have been a miracle that he survived as long as he did. But I presume that we're speaking now, there would still be, another decade or more of Maris making wonderful music. So I just presumed I would come back to the orchestra for a week or two a year and really look forward to it. It's interesting that we started with Schumann. And the Schumann journey was very much a part of the early concerts, because you have to be not only an orchestra of great skill to play this, but an orchestra of great poetry and great humility. He's a complete mirror in that way. There's a kind of collective imagination about this group, and humility in front of great music, which struck me immediately and continues to. There's a certain hush that goes across the room when something beautiful has happened and you realize everybody has moved to another stage. And this is very unusual, even in great orchestras.
And you've been a great advocate for that work, that not so well-known Schumann work, haven't you? It was one of the last two proms that you conducted this last summer. What is it about it?
When I was in my early 20s, Carlo Maria Cellini, one of my great heroes, spoke to me about this piece, saying, this is one of the miracles of 19th century music, and you should get to know it and you should do it, because at this time he was almost the only person who was conducting it. And once again, with the arrogance of youth, I thought, well, no one else is conducting it. How marvelous can it be? And so when I, 30 years later, heard it for the first time, I wanted to kick myself, because I could have had a lifetime of exploring and enjoying this strange and wonderful work. This piece that was the most popular piece in Schumann's lifetime, and for the end of the 19th century. There was a choral society in Scotland formed for the express purpose of performing this every year. It was played so frequently, it must have been a little like the Messiah now for us. At the beginning of the 20th century, it simply dropped out of view, possibly because of the text, feeling that this was strangely sentimental or exotic in a way that didn't work anymore. On the other hand, how many 19th century librettos of many pieces are like this? What it enabled Schumann to do was to produce some of his most imaginative and moving music. And these days, we don't very often get to perform major masterpieces that are neglected. So many things have been found and played endlessly. So this was a gift to me, that any orchestra I've taken to it has been astonished that how did we miss this all our lives?
So the Schumann, the Paradise and the Peri, as we call it in English, will it become part of your plans with the BRSO?
Well,
again?
it was my first concert with them. I'm sure it's one of the pieces that I love to have somewhere in mind, like a Matthew Passion or like Debussy's Pelléas and Melisande, things that you don't want to feel, oh, this may not come round again. Yes, I certainly hope so. But with a great orchestra and chorus like this, so many things jostle to be done. And I'm like a kid in a sweet shop, of course.
Very nicely put. So you say that you've arrived in the right place at this particular point in your life with this orchestra in Munich. Some 360 miles away from Berlin. Are they similar, these cities, these orchestras?
I would struggle to find two cities or orchestras in the same country that were more different. And of course, the history of Germany is that. I mean, these are different federations, but the sensation of being in Bavaria is entirely different from being up in the north here. And of course, I'm a northerner. I'm Liverpool born and bred, Liverpool fan. But there is something very different about the Bavarian way of doing things, about the gentleness, and the time that is available. No, wonderful to be in Germany and have had two such completely different orchestras. I wouldn't have missed either opportunity.
So does that difference then translate itself into the musical personality of the BRSO?
Utterly and completely. But whether this is to do with the place or whether it's to do with the history, with all of Karajan's genius and brilliance, he was a very tough nut, and in a tough nut of a city. And one feels the combative, individualistic sense of this great orchestra at every moment. And it's a particular fiery, burning trademark. In Munich, you feel something very different. You feel the communication, you feel the listening, a type of gentleness. It's not full of brilliant soloists. But just simply a different feeling of how to make music. And of course, the wonderful thing about music is it's a suitcase in which all these things must be packed, but there are many, many different ways of packing them. But you end up certainly with an entirely different sound and style from the orchestra in Munich, just as a basis, and a type of fineness and sensitivity, which is very unusual.
So does that affect in any way what you would see as the role and responsibilities of being a chief conductor? Will it be very different down in Munich than it was in Berlin or in London?
Oh, I mean, I think these days more and more, of course, there is a basic musical necessity to look after a great orchestra. And I sat in the dressing room with Karajan in his later years, and he said, you know, it is an orchestra, it's like one of your English gardens. I mean, they're really beautiful things, but you have to water them, and you have to weed them, and you have to look after it every day. And we'll never forget that. And this is an important thing. We have to do all kinds of dental hygiene. We have to look after people both musically and emotionally. But I think more and more these days, so many of us feel that an orchestra should be part of the center of society. And we should be going out there to people. We should be bringing people in. We should be really showing them that this music is life-changing and giving them every opportunity to have their life changed. And I would say that a healthy, well-functioning artistic community is really something of deep importance to a healthy, well-functioning society. That this is also our job. It's a healing job, it's an educational job, and it's also a job to bring people in, which is why it's wonderful to be in a broadcasting corporation.
Let's come back to that in just a moment, but just going back to your actual relationship with the orchestra, you said recently that you thought working with an orchestra was a bit like a marriage. What did you mean by that?
Well, it depends how many marriages you want to have. You become extremely close. And you, interestingly, I mean, often not close in a trivial way or a normal way. I don't know where everybody in my orchestra lives. I haven't met all their families, but often you know very profound things about people just simply from how we are responding to this material together. And there's just an enormous amount of love and respect that needs to flow on both sides for it to work well. In that way, it's like a marriage.
You also said that you thought that a little humor can help in the relationship.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's a British way of looking at things.
How does that
at least we have in Munich, I must say, we've laughed at a lot of things. And unlike Basil Fawlty, who talked to his wife saying, yes, but we've laughed, haven't we? But she said, yeah, but never at the same things. We seem to be laughing at the same things in Munich.
That sounds terrific. Now, you just touched on it very briefly by saying that this is, of course, a public service media organization, this orchestra. You have a little bit of experience of that when you were very much younger. With the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra, which was around about 1976, was it?
Well, yes, it's a little bit scary, from 76 to 78.
Right.
It was the last time I was involved in a public broadcasting service. So to say I'm out of date is about the kindest thing you could say. But these were great years there, and I really learned my trade there with extremely generous musicians, even if they could never get used to the British accent.
Yeah, and that's in the UK, so there you are. But the whole business of being public service, this is very close to our hearts, all of us who are involved in the EBU, because it poses those questions about what does that actually mean? How are you an orchestra but how are you also somehow attached to a radio station? What are the sort of differences that you think you may start to think about here with the BRSO?
Well, of course, I'm very new here. And when I was working for the BBC in the 70s, this was a time where so much of music and culture came through the radio. I mean, this is where we heard it. This is where we heard about it. And of course, one of the fantastic things about radio is it really does not need to be reinvented. It's a magnificent thing that goes directly to people. But I mean, the privilege of having an orchestra and chorus of your own within there, this is a privilege that we should not take for granted. And as we've seen in the BBC in England, there has been an enormous amount of debate. They unwisely tried to vandalize the BBC singers, and I thought what was very moving in back in the old country was to see the emotional reaction from all over the world that brought. And I think the singers themselves had no idea what a deep place they had in people's hearts. Yeah. This is good to know, but I feel we may still be fighting for this area of public service.
I'm sure we're still fighting, and I think the questions are increasingly being asked, aren't they? Why would a radio station have orchestras? Why would a radio organization or media organization have orchestras?
But isn't the answer somewhere in those words public service? That this is what this is for. This is to help build a society. This is to help make our cities worth living in. This is also to help people of all classes, income brackets, all types, to actually be part of this and live within this. This is the remit of radio. So part of the thing, this is not just a matter of how many clicks you get. It's a matter of trying to take people beyond the norm. This is difficult, isn't it? In a time where there is so much which is there in tiny little snippets. Part of the problem and the joy of classical music is that it happens on a larger canvas, and we have to remind people that also concentration is necessary and brings its own rewards.
I think you're right, and I think the challenges are on both sides, aren't there? There is a challenge for an orchestra in the concert hall as to how it continues to be relevant and bring in the audiences that are not just the traditional audiences, but that have new audiences. And radio, certainly, we are challenged, as you say, by being a medium that rather likes the long form. And has appealed generally to older generations. We're fighting for the younger generations. So somewhere in the middle of all of that, are there ways in which we could sort of cross-fertilize the concert orchestra audiences, who certainly in the UK tend not to listen to the radio, and the radio audiences, listeners who may or may not go to concerts? Is there something that one can do here?
It depends how you do it. I had no idea that you were going to write a book on David Munro. And for those for those in our audience who do not know who this is, I mean, David Munro was the most inspirational figure in early music that there was. And if he had not committed suicide, but he would have been still relatively young and surely working now. He would have changed that whole field. This was a brilliant communicator, and someone who could bring an infectious joy to anything. And I remember as a kid listening to his programs, The Pied Piper, just taking you through music, giving you another journey. And I was privileged to study with him at the Royal Academy. So I sung my first and only Mashal Mass under his baton. He is the person who made me conduct Gesualdo, who taught me countless things. But the idea that you can take people on a journey in a different way, the part of the thing of being a broadcasting company, is there is the possibility of being able to insert yourselves into people's lives. I do have rather a dream with the Bayerische Rundfunk Orchestra that we could make short films, I mean, tiny films, maybe little 10 minutes, 15 minutes if we're being generous, on little areas of music or little emotions of music. And that simply be in every school in Germany once a week. Or that the schools could watch us at work and realize that, contrary to normal opinion, we are actually human beings. And that how are we making this happen? I think anything that brings people closer and cuts away the mystique will make it better. And just to say, we have an important story to tell.
We do indeed, and I think the Pied Piper analogy is quite a good one, isn't it? Because this leading people on. I would.
Yeah, if you remember the end of the book, not quite so, but up to a certain point, yes.
Yes, up to it. The first bits, the really most important bits. But I was listening to a lot of those programs recently, and you're right, he was such an infectious communicator. And so there is something, isn't there, about being within a media organization which should help us also in the orchestras with this whole challenge of communication, how we talk the language. What was extraordinary about David Munro was that in a rather formal period of broadcasting, when announcers sounded terribly formal, he just actually talked to people in completely naturally. And I think
this was interesting because I mean, so many of us have been going back to Bernstein's programs, but in comparison, they sound rather received pronunciation. They sound rather formal, although they are completely brilliant. With David, it was just as it was exactly like when he was teaching at the Royal Academy, and there was irresistible.
So you have some inspiration there for being a Pied Piper in Munich.
Well, it would be wonderful. I mean, there's a very strange thing in Munich that the orchestra has never really had a home, and we don't really have a studio even, in which we can seriously work. I mean, we can with smaller groups of people. So it's an orchestra that is always on tour from one place to another within Munich. It's interesting to be on tour in your own city. But so many things we could do to put this art form out to people if we had a place from which to do it. If we knew where we were going to be from one week to another. And this is frustrating. Of course, it frustrated Maris as well, which is why he started this process to find a hall. Hopefully now something will happen. I mean, things tend not to move at the speed of light in Bavarian politics, but let's hope that something happens at least in the next decade. But I mean, obviously, to transmit things to people, you have to have the place in which to do it. We want so much to increase our visibility in the society around us, and so much to bring people in to see what this is. But being homeless doesn't make it easier. Let's put it like that.
No, and you've talked about the possibility of this space and hopefully the flexibility of it, giving you, as I think you put it, permission to go a bit wild.
Well, I think it's quite dangerous now if you're going to build a new home for music to think that what it can be is a version of a 19th century hall. I think people demand other things, just in the way that museums and art galleries have changed over the last 50 years. If concert halls haven't, they should be. And this will have to be the future. And it will also need to be a digital future, because it will need to be putting the art out to people and long distance learning. I mean, the possibilities are endless once you have them.
And there's something here, isn't there, about recent history, about COVID, about that sort of complete pause in all of our lives, and a reevaluation coming back about what it is that audiences need now from concerts, from broadcasts. Do you feel that audiences' expectations and behaviour have changed since COVID?
This has been very interesting. In London, my experience has been that, in fact, there's very, very good audiences once again, but they're not necessarily the same people as they were before. This is a new audience, and a lot of our older audience are still fearful or simply got out of the habit. And I think we're only at the very start of sorting out what people need. Do people need shorter concerts? Do they need earlier concerts? Do they need more variety? I think that this is going to be a fantastic journey. But I think we've only just begun to sort out what an orchestra should be in the 21st century. But now we're faced with another conundrum of how we look into the future. And we must really make all kinds of different efforts, because otherwise the art form will die. And we must not allow this to happen. But we must find as many ways of getting across to people as possible.
And this will be close to your heart, won't it? Because the spirit of experimentation has always been important to you.
Well, music always was experimentation, and this doesn't mean that it's necessary. I mean, all music was new music once. The moment I'm working on Charpentier's Médée, and from the end of the 17th century, and some of it sounds as though it was written yesterday. It's so shockingly experimental in its own way. So it's to find what these things are. I'm very much looking forward to the Munich time. I mean, there's been a long tradition of contemporary music from the Musica Viva, which is now well over its half century. Now, we are beginning to work on putting together a period instrument orchestra from within the orchestra. I mean, there's a long, slow, but very, very satisfying process, because we all believe that all these periods of music are tied up together and that they will all affect each other. But I think we have to be just given the chance to experiment and see what works for people. See, for instance, how much of the theatre we can bring in to the concert hall. And some things, of course, won't work, and that's the joy of it.
So is your vision then for a space in which you can do this that isn't as restrictive as the architecture of a traditional concert hall?
I think you need something that is, yes, you need the architectural equivalent of David Munro, something that is so attractive and irresistible and welcoming that people simply have to come and find out what is going on there. And we have to be able to show our faces and indeed educate our young musicians to be evangelists in this way and go out and say to people, you need this in your life, among the many other things that are out there available, jostling for attention. Come and experience this.
So do you think there is a time limit then on the traditional concert format? Are we going to see that declining in the 21st century?
It depends what you mean as traditional. If we had been at the beginning of the 20th century together, concerts were very different. The big symphonies were at the start of evenings because it was felt people couldn't concentrate longer. I mean, it has slowly and surely changed over time, and it will carry on changing. And I mean, in my lifetime, I've seen the overture almost disappear from concert programs. The thing that we had at the beginning of every concert when I was a kid. I was stunned to play the second only performance of Dvorak's Carnival Overture with the Berlin Philharmonic. There'd been one in 1938 and one in the middle of the 21st century. But that's one of his most popular pieces was unknown by the orchestra. And my goodness, they said, this is really hard. But of course, so things will carry on changing. People's tastes will change. The kind of thing they want to hear and the way they want to hear it will change. And this we have to go. This we have to go with. And I look forward to being ever more of an old dinosaur as people take it further and further.
But I like this concept that you seem to be building here of an orchestra that can encompass so much of this, the traditional repertoire. You then were talking about contemporary music. You've got these plans for early music, authentic instruments. Can you talk a little bit more about that, about how the community expands and contracts and changes in front of your eyes, if you like?
Ernest Fleischmann, who was one of the great orchestra managers really of the last century, he talked about something which was called an orchestra of possibilities, where people would have many different types of skills that should be exploited together. Certain people would want to do certain things more. It was interestingly, in Munich, there are a lot of players who are already interested in historically informed performance, as there are a lot of players who care very much about what was written yesterday and tomorrow. And I think these things should all cross-fertilize. And I think we should also get together more and more with other performers and other artists to see what we can produce together, to see where the art form will go. I think, though, there should be no limits on this.
And you've also got the BRSO Academy, haven't you? Young people, young players coming up. How does that fit within the community of the orchestra, and what plans might you have for that?
Well, yeah, this is something we all have to thank Herbert von Karajan for making basically the first orchestra academy in Berlin. This has been fascinating to watch happen, because a musician's education never stops. I feel like I'm now coming to the end of my teenage years, teenage with bad knees, but for all of us, the education stops too early, and you have learned a certain amount, but you need so much more. And when wonderful young musicians are seconded to a great orchestra, they learn so much, but also they learn how it is that, what is in the DNA of this great orchestra, how do they react? And for so many of them, they realize that this is where the education started. And of course, as the level of instrumental virtuosity has gone up in a most extraordinary way, so more and more things are possible. But of course, also musicians now need not a narrow view. They need views of all periods of music. They also need to know how to communicate it. It will not do to be in your ivory tower playing beautifully. They need to know also how to speak to people, how to be educators, how to be, once again, evangelists. And this is something they need to learn. And so I'm hoping to challenge them with all kinds of pieces. I mean, as it happens in December, we cover two of the areas at once by doing Hans Zender's extraordinary reimagination of Schubert's Winterreise for ensemble, which is still, I mean, one of the only pieces which takes a masterpiece as the template, but treats it with this amount of love and imagination. And so this also is a piece which has all kinds of different theatrical journeys through it. So this is a good start. But I think we need to find so many ways to challenge them. I mean, not only just to fill in when people are sick, but to also be a beacon in music and say what is needed in the rest of the century.
And the challenges are there too, aren't they, about quite how we communicate. We're all so much more now aware of diversity and inclusion issues out in society and out in our audiences, and indeed,
and thank goodness
that we haven't reached yet. How do you go about taking something as very traditional as an orchestra and reaching across social and ethnic divides in society?
I suppose this is different in each country. I mean, there is still, I think, now I have to be careful how I put this. In Germany, there is a feeling that the arts, culture are part of our social contract, that this is important. I mean, this is a battle that has not been won in the United Kingdom, certainly politically. In Germany, it absolutely has. I think, I mean, in many ways, it's like feudal farming. You have to take your bag of seeds and throw them out and see what grows. But you must continually be providing the seeds and trying to follow up where you see growth happening. And I think this is going to be all of our responsibility. I mean, I am thrilled in this time that there is a greater diversity of performers and composers performed. And it's been fascinating that in the last 20 years, there's been a tipping point for female conductors, for instance. And you realize now, finally, there's really a generation of people coming up and will be more and more and better and better. And there'll be no looking back. And I think this will be more and more important. And thank goodness, about time we've done this. This should be, as I keep on saying, for everybody. And that means everybody.
Do you feel then a similar tipping point to do with access for people who've traditionally found that difficult, people with physical disabilities, mental disabilities? Are we grappling with that?
I hope so. I think it's very important. But I think we have to do it with care, and we have to provide events which work for this. I mean, physical disabilities. I mean, working in the Hercules Saal in Munich, which is a wonderful old building. I think for someone who is physically handicapped, this must be an extremely difficult building. Whatever you do. For people with mental handicaps, you need to find special formats. But I think this needs to be something that we work on. I mean, a lot from the start in Birmingham, we worked with music for deaf children, which seemed a very strange thing at the time. But we all learned so much from this and realized that there were so many different routes into this, even for people of little or no hearing.
So in this very busy, very loud, media-dominated world where things are coming at all of us from from every direction. Are there some easy wins, do you think, for those of us in classical music to get our voice at least heard, to get somewhere onto the radar?
I think we have to just slowly and surely draw people into us. We will not be able to make as much noise or have such an extraordinary light show as Kendrick Lamar, a completely brilliant musician and stunningly intelligent performer as he is. We have to say there are some things with which we can't compete. But we must slowly and surely draw people in, see that for people to see that this is another type of experience. And in this modern noisy world, people are looking for spiritual experiences. They're looking for peace, for quiet, also to be challenged. These are all important things. And this we should not give up on. Of course, we can do easy wrappings for things, but there's a certain point where we have to say, no, this is what it is. Come and experience this on its own terms.
I like something that I saw that you'd said recently, that, that we must give people the experience and then we see who takes it.
Exactly. This is not for everybody, but actually no art form is for everybody. But this is part of the glory of the arts, and we just must make sure that this entire garden keeps growing and flourishing.
But it is absolutely about making sure that people don't miss out, isn't it? That the opportunity is all.
Exactly, and this is why starting at the youngest possible age and being visible to school children is important. And also kind of learning what's going on around. I mean, we recently started a project with the Blas Musik Orchestra in Bavaria, of which there are many hundreds. The wind orchestra there is somehow equivalent to the brass band in England, but going around the country and hearing the level. I mean, 120 different orchestras applied to come and work with us, and members of the orchestra heard all of them. I heard 25 of them or so. But the level, the passion, the commitment of this very particular type of music is there. I found immensely moving. I can't wait to be working again with more of them at the end of the season. But it's simply also a knowledge of the hunger there is for all kinds of music. This very, very strong tradition has made deep roots, and it's fascinating for me to find out.
Now, you said earlier that you thought in your own personal journey as a conductor, you were sort of in your teenage years, or possibly just coming out of your teenage years, which is wonderful, because that's eternally young, isn't it? But I wonder, actually, seriously, where you do sort of feel you are along the road as a conductor, your own personal journey.
I think if you feel too pleased with what you are achieving, that's a problem. I think, for most of us must have endless doubts and wonder whether we're actually doing this properly. It's hard to articulate, of course. But then with these old sayings of, the further you go, the further you realize you have to go. All these things are true. A very wise man in my teenage years, called John Dolby from the National Youth Orchestra of Great Britain, wrote to me saying, "Simon, whatever, will you promise me that in your journey through music, that you promise to journey and promise never to arrive? Always keep on the journey." And I think that's where we are. There's a few things we know. but it keeps on going. And as I remember Bernard Haitink saying to me, no, you've done more, but that doesn't mean that it becomes easier. Don't worry. Don't worry if it still seems that hard, because it is that hard. I've been so lucky to have such an extraordinary group of experiences and work with so many great musicians. And we just all try to help and support each other.
It's the traveling, hopefully, isn't it? Not the
arrival. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and we're back to Becky and I would fail better.
We fail better. But there must be some musical dreams, some musical desires which you'd still like to bring to reality. Are there any that you want to talk about?
Oh, where do we start? I would love to get the first two notes of Brahms' Fourth Symphony as I imagine it. But that might only take another 300 years.
Okay, that's two notes. Anything bigger than two notes? Although I do understand that two notes can be a universe, but
there are certain pieces for I think for every conductor, there are certain pieces which you find too difficult to approach. I mean, for me, the Bach B minor Mass, the Beethoven Missa Solemnis. I mean, for instance, the dreams are to help this group of musicians and the next bunch of musicians coming up to achieve their dreams. And once again, just simply to journey. And I feel that I need to be the ship in which to help that happen. I think the dream is allowing people to express their possibilities. Much more vague than saying this type of building or this type of society or conduct these 10 operas.
Yes, and much more important, actually, because it's all about possibilities, isn't it? I think you may just have answered one of the questions that we had in the chat, which was about your personal leadership style. But I think a lot has emerged from that and what you have just said about being with people on the journey.
Oh, look, I mean, you look at me. I'm an old kind of hairy, woolly liberal from the 60s. That remains. I was always, even as a young conductor, conductors like Raphael Kubelik, like Carlo Maria Giulini, like Bruno Walter, they appealed to me because there seemed to be a humanity rather than the enormously strict disciplinarians, thrilling though I often found the music. I found that closer. But I'm sure my family and my orchestras will say, actually, he's terribly bossy and terribly stubborn as well. But who thinks they are?
Okay, so look, there's another question here which has a sort of bearing on that. Is the position of chief conductor of a radio orchestra more political than in another orchestra, given the position of broadcasting organizations in society?
Well, I may be about to learn that as we go. I mean, the thing about a radio company is that they are absolutely enormous organisms. And I think it would take me another lifetime to sort out really what is going on in there. But one of the mistakes you make, I mean, the young conductor makes is say you can avoid being political. When I had lunch with the great British director, Sir Peter Hall in Glyndebourne one day, and he was being monthly attacked by Margaret Thatcher for being a typical liberal artist and being above himself. I asked him, what does it feel like to be attacked in public so often? And he said, Simon, no, this is no fun, but it's part of the job. And then he gave his most charming smile and said, and guess what? You'll be next. So we all have to be political. We all have to fight for this. And this doesn't matter where you are. Maybe, the joy of a radio station should be there are more people fighting with you. So let's hope that's true.
Yeah, that's definitely a thought to treasure, and to make something of. One very practical question about your role at the BRSO, about the programming. How much input you will have into the programming of the concerts, and how that will work, that process.
My own programming, I basically do myself, of course, but I'm fascinated by what else happens and who else comes and works, and what the possibilities are. And of course, if you run an orchestra, you need to see how do they need to be challenged? How do they need to grow? Also, sometimes it's as simple as what haven't they played? What do we need to look at? What is missing? So a lot. I would love to have been a chef in another life, which is much harder work than anything in the musical profession. But the idea of making menus and seeing what kinds of journeys of taste and sound you can make is very, very appealing to me.
A piece of practical advice is asked for here from our colleagues in Slovenia, where there are plans to close down the music production department due to lack of finances. How do they combat that? What would you do if you were in Slovenia at this point?
Oh, I think you need everybody you can to fight for you and with you, and you need to go out to the public and explain what is going on and what will be missed, because these kind of things can be done so quickly and ignorantly with one signature, and then take years to rebuild. So it's easy to say from this situation, but go out and make yourself heard and simply explain to people what this is and what will be missing. This is the only way it has worked at the moment.
And as you mentioned earlier, it was very interesting with the BBC Singers earlier this year, when precisely that happened, and the response took, I think, everyone by surprise. We are about to run out of time, but one final question here, big question, nice question to finish on. What is the most important thing you want to give people through classical music?
Oh, that's a difficult question to answer. Without sounding too pretentious, I think this art form can tell people what it is to be human, what this means in the biggest sense, and that we're not alone, that somebody else felt this. And of course, I think it comes from way earlier even than the necessity of speech, the idea of what music is, of rhythm, of all the sounds around us. I think it is a need, as is food and water. So that's all.
So that's all, and that's everything, really, isn't it? So
well, it really is. And what a privilege to have been working in an art that enables us to be part of that.
I think all of us on this call probably feel that we are the lucky ones who are able to work in and with and at something which means so much to us. And we
exactly. And thank you out there, all of you, for everything you are doing to keep the arts and culture alive. we owe you more than I could possibly express.
Simon, thank you very much indeed. Monica, back to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much to you, Simon Rattle, for sharing your thoughts with the whole EBU music community and many more people through our website. And many thanks to you, Edward, for leading this discussion in such a brilliant way. The recording of the interview will stay available on our webpage, and we invite you all to share it as widely as you can, those beautiful words and thoughts, including on socials. So thanks very much to everybody, and have a very nice afternoon.